Good afternoon and welcome to DC Shorts. This is the panel on post-production. I'm Elaine Seward, and for those of you who don't know, post-production is what happens after the film has been shot. I'm a video producer at the American Chemical Society. We have a YouTube channel and partner with PBS that's all about chemistry. We're very irreverent, but for my videos, I do all of the post work, which includes editing, animation, graphics, and audio. And I can get more into our process about that later, but I'd like to introduce my co-panelists here. We have Ted.
Hi, I'm Ted Hogeman. I am the founder of the company Orange Lion Sound Design. I'm a freelance filmmaker been a freelance filmmaker for about 10 years, specializing in post-production sound, but I've also done the whole post-production process of editing, sound, color correction on the 24 shorts that I've directed.
My name is Darrell Ayer. I'm a DP and colorist, and then I recently did a short, 30-minute short, but I did all of the post-production on that, from editing to color to effects, and like a full round trip through DaVinci Resolve. So.
Cool. So let's get into talking about some post. I mean, personally, I love post-production because you have such control of a project, and it really can take the shape of what you're doing. I mean, I get so many takes, so many different versions of the same clip, the same line, and stringing those together in a way I get to control this narrative and what people's emotions are and how they're experiencing this beast of a project. And I just think that's really, really cool. And every single pixel that you see is very, very intentional, all from post. Every single thing that you see is because a person in post chose for that to be there. For example, would you like to talk about the color grading and then sound design?
Certainly. So in a lot of projects, like when you get into shooting something, you are able to kind of mold it like 80% of the way there, and then in post you're able to kind of sweeten it up with the color grade. A lot of the stuff that I do is stuff that I also shoot, so it's very nice in post to be able to kind of know all the shortcuts that I've taken on the day, and then bring in those final stages and window things in and kind of make people pop up out of the background and things like that. And in my most recent thing, a lot of the effects stuff, even in doing that, like doing things like paint outs and things like that for stuff that happens on the day that you can't get rid of. It really gives you a little bit of flexibility on that, and reframing, and who knows what else. So.
And for sound, it's really amazing how many problems you can solve with sound design. Sometimes we joke that it is the best low-budget way to make a film feel high-budget, because you can take something like two people in a room and make it sound like the apocalypse is happening outside with just a basic sound library, or even just going around your house and recording some interesting sound effects. And you can sell the idea of the end of the world with basically no budget and a little bit of creativity. And that's one of the things I love most about sound design, is you can really tell much bigger stories than you might think you're able to just with sound alone.
It's so true. Sound makes such an impact. I mean, we'll have videos and we'll just add in sound effects, and it's just, everything is so much more impactful, and it gets everybody much more engaged.
I'll take that a step too and say, like, I did some of the sound design on my recent project, and even just something like putting reverb on everything really helps you make a space bigger, smaller, especially if you've got audio and you've gone through something to kind of clean up background sound that happens on the day, and then to kind of fill it back out again like that.
So working in the YouTube sphere, I mean, if you look at YouTube a decade ago, it was such a vastly different spot than it is now. Everything has changed. Our entire channel has changed in that time. We used to be fully animated, and now it's fully host-driven. And a lot of the times, I get inspiration by watching YouTube and watching culture and what's happening in the world, and trying to stay ahead of what the next curve might be, what that next change might be. And a lot of the times, we're trying to stay ahead of that and trying to stay fresh and relevant, but also familiar. And a lot of times that involves taking some risks. And figuring out what works and what doesn't work, because in this, specifically the YouTube sphere, and probably in every part of production and the film world, is if you don't change, if you stay static, you're just dead in the water. So it's always about growing and changing and figuring out what the next thing is, how you can push it, how you can be better. And a lot of the times, we'll take cues from other YouTube channels and kind of make it our own. We just put out a short today that is 3-minute longs, a single take of a water droplet just bouncing on a spoon, lead and frost effect. If you don't know, you heat up metal like a cast iron and then put water on, and essentially steam forms under the water and it just makes it dance. So we have this entire short where it's just this water droplet, and at the very end there's a tiny explosion, and we're all having so many conversations about this one single 3-minute long short and being like, I like it, I don't think it'll perform well, but let's just put it out there and see how it does. And I think a lot of post-production, specifically editing and pushing things forward, is about not being afraid to take risks or not being afraid to try something different. And would you two have anything to add about taking risks, changing, pushing forward?
Well, yeah, speaking to that, I mean, one of the things that I've found, it's both very satisfying and very frustrating as an editor, is a lot of times I tend to over-edit my first rough cut, and then you realize, oh, look, all this work I did, I need to do about half of that, and you basically pull it out, you extend your takes, you let a moment breathe. And I mean, it's, again, one of the things that's most joyful about being an editor is finding the feel of a movie or the feel of a story when it feels right. And then one of the frustrating things is realizing that a lot of times you have to basically undo what you've just done in order to get there. And so it's a lot of take 2 steps forward, take a step back. Again, it's a very satisfying and roundabout job.
I would say that like after you get your rough cut and you're doing it and you're like, oh yeah, this is pretty good. I think everybody will kind of like it. But like you're kind of screaming internally in the back of your head, and then you get to that moment and you start cutting it for pacing, and you kind of find the rhythm in it and it goes through, and then you watch it again and you've only cut like half a second off of everything, and then it just has this flow and you're like, oh, there it is. Like it's amazing to see that leap. And it's the smallest thing, but it skyrockets in viewability, really.
Actually, yeah, let's take a moment and talk about production flow and how your post-productions work. For me personally, our hosts will give me a ton of footage. One of our hosts, we joke that he just shoots everything. Like, he will throw away a piece of paper in a garbage can and we will get like the 360 matrix shot is what we joke. The amount of footage he gives us, but it is a blessing and a curse because I get all this footage, and then what I do is I cut down his takes of what I like, what I think works well. He's not flubbing, it works well, and then I get 7 to 12 takes of him doing that, and then I get all of those put together in my string out, and then I go and I find the ones that work well together, like where his inflections go up, and then it comes back down, and it just works. The pacing, the flow works, and I put those together, and that's how I kind of create this string out. And we have a lot of experiments that are done, and so I will edit together his experiments, and then I will put the voiceover under that, and then I'll kind of put these pieces together, and then I will go back to George, and I will be like, hey, here's the string out, here's what I think we're missing, here's what I think we need to add, and then he will go and he'll film the A-roll, because first we're working with B-roll, and then we get to some A-roll. And it's a really collaborative process between, we have this outline to begin with, he films experiments, I cut it together, I tell him what the A-roll we need, and that's how we kind of get this, and then I will get this whole string out, and then I start cutting like, oh, this can go. We always have like a through line, essentially what this is about in our videos, and if it's not serving that, I'm just like, this can just go. Or if something makes it more confusing, or if the pacing isn't right, I just cut it. But I always start with it much longer than it needs to be by, probably about 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm talking about editing down a 15-minute video here, and then I just cut until it feels right. And a lot about editing and feeling right is you just intuitively learn it, and to kind of start to learn it, watch other YouTube videos, watch TV, notice when those cuts are happening, and a lot of times you don't notice it because it's seamless and it feels right. But if you start to pay attention, you can start to click that in your brain. You're like, oh, and then put that in your cuts. And a lot of the times if something isn't working, I will just overextend the shot just so it's ridiculous, and then I get that feeling, I'm like, okay, that's where this should cut. And I know I started talking about how my workflow is and then got to cutting, but that is part of my process too, just trying to figure out how things, and the more you work with it and the more you get this feeling, the more right it will feel. And also sometimes you want those moments where it doesn't feel right, just to jar, and it all depends on the mood you're going for. But you want to explain some of your workflow?
Well, yeah, just to speak to that, sometimes it feels like when I'm editing a video, it's like going through a maze. So I like to make a list of sort of all my shots. Like I've got my wide shot of all our characters in the space. I've got a shot of character A, a shot of character B, and it's you're thinking like, how do I get through this scene? And you're sort of, ideally, if you have enough time, you're watching all your takes, you're watching all your different shots, and you are piecing together like how to sort of moment to moment how we're stepping through that scene, keeping in mind what, like, if we're going into a close-up, we're getting maybe more intimate with our characters and thinking about that emotion. And then sometimes you make a mistake and you realize, oh no, I'm at a dead end, like there's no good takes in this wide shot, but I need to cut to the wide shot here, which means I'm gonna have to go back a few seconds and recut what I've just done and basically step back through the maze and find a new path through. In terms of workflow, I think one of the things that I both like about being an editor, but is also, you can definitely mess up if you're not paying attention to it, is being organized. Definitely both, ideally you're organized on the day where you've got good scene and shot numbers, or if you're doing like documentary, hopefully somebody's keeping notes. If not, you'll probably be the one taking those notes as you go through. And I know for me personally, I like to, if I have the time, watch through all the footage I've got and just make notes, because then I can go back and keyword search, say like waterfall or forest or bird, and that helps me just keep the project organized. The big thing is also, especially if you're on indie film, you might be coming back to a project multiple times over many years, and it really, really helps to make sure you've labeled sort of what you've done on your timeline so that if you're coming back to it, say a year later, you know where you left off.
Also to add to that, sorry. I taught a class in Photoshop, and I always told the students, the goal of organization is that someone else opens up this project and just magically knows how to step in and do what they need to do without you having to get involved. So I'm just like, organization is, in the end, making you lazier, because if it's well organized, you step back in 5 years later, you know exactly what's going on, or someone else has to step in, they know exactly what's going on without having to bother you and you having to recall what on earth you were doing.
Working in like on a hyper no budget indie, our project that we shot took place over about 2 years, and what we would do is we would shoot a scene at a time or kind of work our way around that, and it was very interesting to shoot that. And then I'd shoot the scene, and I'm very impatient, so we would go and edit it within like 2 or 3 days of shooting it, and then over the next week. And then we kind of got each of those scenes into their own timelines and then threw that into a master timeline so that you could then sort of see this thing slowly take shape. You know, you get, it's like Tetris. It was just like you got scene 1 and 5 and 2 and 7, and then it just sort of bounces around until it filled out. And then you got to watch most of a movie. And it was actually really good to turn around and go back. And we had some third act problems with, we went out and we kind of shot it what we wanted, but we didn't have everything that we needed, and it was very nice to kind of go in, edit it together, and then look at the problem as it exists and say, okay, that's that. You know, the whole middle of this thing isn't working. This is what we've got. This is where we are. This is where we have to go. What can we put in the middle here and go back and play that way? It was really good. So.
Another thing about post is collaboration is key. A lot of the times, you know, my coworker and I, we both do the same job, and we'll put our cut up on Whipster, and he is infamous for saying that I will put a suggestion on that he thinks I should be fired for because it's so insane and out there, and then he starts doing it, and he's like, oh no, she was right. So it's really nice to have different perspectives. We see things so differently. We get along, we're on the same team, we work really well together, but we just see problems so differently and how we choose that solution. And so really him and I working together really makes our work so much better because, you know, we respect each other and we will take the suggestion, even though we think, well, this is absolutely insane. Collaboration has worked so well with our team. Do you guys have collaborations to speak on?
Yeah, actually, so I think that's a really good point is, one, even though it can be, a lot of times editing is a solo job, it's one person sitting at a computer doing it, it helps to reach out to somebody else Because a lot of times we will be sitting and we're watching the same scene over and over and over again, and so we lose our sense of objectivity. And so having just a partner or a friend or somebody to come in and take a look and be like, how does this feel to you? Like, this feels off to me, but is that just because I've watched it 24 times? Can really help. And then also in collaboration, and this is more of a workflow thing, but it's really important to know if you are working with a larger team or if you're doing it solo. So like if I'm doing sound design for my own project, I'm fine with sort of cutting certain tracks out of the editing project. If somebody else is editing a project to give to me for sound design, I really don't want them to cut any sound out of that project, because as the post-sound mixer, I want to have access to all that information, all that stuff. So it's really important to think through when you're putting a project together, how big is my team going to be? What workflow will they need? And just asking sort of everybody, what will you need from this process before you even start post-production? So for example, like the editor probably doesn't want to listen to all 10 tracks that were recorded on the day. And some editors will then just delete those tracks, but that becomes a big pain to then put them back in when it comes time for sound mixing. Whereas if they just muted them, everybody's happy. And same thing for color as well. It's sort of, you don't want the editor to necessarily be making big color correction choices if it's going to a colorist later, because that might mess up their ability to work with the raw files. And so it's really important to just talk through like the whole team and sort of ask people what they need before you start the project, and just make sure everybody's on the same page.
I definitely agree with that. The other thing that I was going to say that you're making me think of is doing Foley in post and going and doing that. That was like a fun day, and what we did, DaVinci's got really good ADR tools, and so we just used that to then put through a track and running around the house and banging pots and pans and stomping around in the kitchen and stuff like that. And like making an afternoon out of turning this 30-minute short into just a bunch of stuff, or just sitting there with like clothes and just rubbing them together every time somebody moves. So it actually has like that little bit of depth to it and stuff like that. So it's
That's my favorite underappreciated sound effect, is just clothing rustle.
yeah.
Another thing you have to deal with in post is feedback.
My director and I, there's a running joke where she just comes to me and she'll just text me and she just says I have notes, and that's the entire of post production. It's just like we'd work for a day, we'd render it out, I'd put a private link to her and she could watch it in her own time because she was about 2 hours away in Richmond, and would come in and be like, okay, this is great, and then here's all the notes for everything you have to do tonight to fix it. And but it's one of those things, is the collaboration, and like you were saying earlier, where you're talking about your collaborative partner being like, all right, I'll do this. I don't understand what you're saying, but I'll do it. I was him. I totally understand that. Like, I'd just be like, I don't want to change anything. Like, all I see is the work ahead of me, and then I would begrudgingly do it, and all those suggestions were right every time.
And I mean, sometimes we'll have people that will just comment on it being like, I don't like this. And I'm just like, thanks, that's really, really helpful. But then it kind of gets me to kind of look at it at a deeper level and be like, okay, what is happening in this moment that can make a person not like it? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? How is that person feeling? Because that's a negative emotion. Do I want that negative emotion? What is conveying that? What is that possible thing? Is it this flow? Is it the pace? Is it the coloring? Is it the sound? Like, what is this? And it really makes me kind of take a step back and think about the emotional trajectory of this and how things are working together. And sometimes if someone doesn't like a moment, that's a good thing that you want. So sometimes the most frustrating feedback will actually get me to kind of take a step back and look at its project.
Yeah, I second that. Of just, there are moments where, especially when we've been sitting in a dark room working on this for hours and somebody says, that's not right, you want to bristle and say no. But a lot of times that feedback can be really good, especially if you're working with a director. It's important to make sure that you are matching sort of what they feel is right for the project. And a lot of times it's easy to lose, like we were talking about earlier, lose that sense of objectivity. And so sometimes you just need a fresh set of eyes to tell you when something's not working.
We would do the film outs, we'd show it, and then we'd get to a certain point, and because it was kind of a group of friends working on this, we would show it to like the actors and everybody else, and we would just kind of go through and sit back and then have, like meeting calls with everybody and all this, and just sort of be like, what would you guys think? What do you, like, where do you feel those at? And is it, sometimes it's, oh, I don't like the way that I said that, and then sometimes it's just sort of like, yeah, and this just sort of felt weird, and you're like, explain more,
And I will say, also, not every piece of feedback is correct. As editors, you're working with this most closely. You know it. You're the expert of this project. And sometimes people not liking a thing, you're like, well, that's the point, or that was the intention. And my girlfriend, I make her watch my work. She hates chemistry. And she'll be like, I don't understand why anyone would watch this. And I'm like, nope. When this video gets to the correct audience, it's going to take off. And then the running joke is now that the more she hates a video, the more successful it'll become. Which is another point of like, you're the expert there, you know what you're talking about, you know what you're doing, and to trust yourself with that.
So speaking of that, I've got a question for the two of you. What is the most fun or interesting problem you've solved in post, where you had to solve it in post?
I'm sorry, fun?
That is a good question. I will say I worked on this short last week, and it's about if you mix Everclear and water, say you have 250 milligrams of Everclear and 250 grams of water, you would think that'd be 500, but it actually condenses down to 285, which is crazy. So this video starts off with George being like, I'm mixing Everclear with water, and then in post, I'm just like, this isn't hitting. People are just going to swipe away in the first 5 seconds. I'm like, I think we need to open it with that line of 250 and 250 equals 485. And so George did shoot new voiceover, but this is a problem we picked in post. We used the exact same footage. All he did was shoot some new voiceover, and it just changed the whole nature of this video. Like the first cut to the very last one that we released, it's just completely night and day. It's so much more engaging when he's talking about what you're going to be learning in the short opposed to what he's doing. And that was a really cool thing to kind of work through. But yeah, we did that all last Friday in post.
I would say on my project, the first thing that we had shot was the scene where the two main characters are driving in a car. And that's a lot of dialogue stuff, and we do a lot of info dumps and stuff in it, stealing a rule from Cameron. And when I first saw it, I was like terrified that it wasn't working, and it was before I composited the windows in, because we did a poor man's process on green screen, and there was no energy there. And then as soon as you put the moving backgrounds in, it immediately, they weren't even well composited. I can talk badly about it because I did it. And but the second that the background just started moving past them, it was like that's the first big hurdle was taken care of there.
I had a similar thing where I was cutting together a scene and I was there for the actual shoot doing location sound. And we had been running out of time on the day, and when I got to the edit, realized that we didn't have the coverage we needed. So it's characters at an electrical panel, and they're trying to type in a code to access it. But we cut from them at the closed panel to them just suddenly the panel's point of view looking out at them, and the panel's open. There's no shot of the panel opening. And so I was thinking, oh no, I'm in trouble here. What I was able to do after sort of smacking my head against the keyboard for a couple minutes was actually sort of have the screen start black, and with a little, very, very basic VFX, make it look like the panel was falling away with the sound of metal clanking. And now it's one of my favorite shots in that project, because it turns something that was this big problem into this pretty funny joke that got a lot of laughs when we screened it. But yeah, speaking to what you were saying, I think one of the interesting things about post is it's really easy to get discouraged halfway through the process, because you look at it and you're like, oh my God, this feels so janky, this feels wrong, this is nobody, like people are gonna laugh at this, oh my gosh, and I call that like the forest of despair. And you always gotta keep going, because it's not until you've actually put in your sound design, it's not until you see it with the color correction, you see it with the final VFX, that you might realize, oh, this actually is all, like it will come together in ways that you just maybe can't see halfway through the process. And
even adding 10% more to it,
Yeah.
It's like once that other piece locks in, you're like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, and also with like the problem solving, a lot of posts is, being super, super creative. And, sometimes if we're missing a shot, we'll put up a thing that says, boom, chemistry. And then, and it's funny, we don't have the shot, so we just chemistry, in a way. And it works because it's funny, and our channel is really irreverent, and people like to have fun, so we have fun with it. And we like to be creative, and also this comes also with working in a team. I'll be like, oh God, we don't have the shot, what can we do? And then we'll ping pong around and then come up with like chemistry. Does anybody have any questions or something you'd like us to touch on?
Good, that means we get to talk more about ourselves. No, go ahead.
Good question. I personally do all Adobe, Premiere, After Effects, Photoshop, Illustrator.
A lot more Photoshop than you would expect, yeah. But primarily Adobe Premiere, Final Cut Pro 10, and then I'm just starting to teach myself DaVinci Resolve. And then for post-sound design, I tend to use Adobe Audition.
I did all of my post in DaVinci. I started DaVinci as a colorist 10 years ago, and then they got editing, and I was like, ooh, let's try this. And then they got sound, and I was like, ooh, let's try this. And it's just gone from there. It's, I will recommend and do what I can to convert both of you guys to it. I think that it's great in the way, I don't know how long you guys have been in it or anybody out here has, but it reminds me of old school Final Cut in that like it had a suite of everything in under one umbrella, except now it's all under one hood. And even going through this, I did the Hollywood thing of I'll figure it out when I get to that point. And so like going through it and learning each of those separate programs, especially Fusion, which is really hard because coming from Andrew Kramer After Effects tutorials and stuff like this, my brain was set to layers, and that's nodes. And when you look at it, you go, oh no. But when you get into it a little bit and then you can start actually identifying your way around it, it really becomes much easier, and it becomes really easy to kind of take chunks of it out, or say you've got 20 shots that do the same thing and you just copy that node tree and slap it in there and then add in the one or two nodes of the variables. So I don't know if I said this before, but my project was a Ghostbusters project. And so it'd be things like proton streams, and I would literally just pull that, okay, I have it, do that. And then maybe if it's a wider shot, I'll shrink some of the elements down or build them back up. But I didn't have to rebuild it in the same way you have to do when you do nesting layers. And that's phenomenal. I will do what I can to get anybody converted to DaVinci. I think it's a very intuitive way to go through post.
I mean, I think a big thing is also just pick an app and learn it, because whatever you learn and become familiar with, you'll probably, like, the basic principles of editing are sort of the same across any application. And so it's more a matter of what do you feel comfortable in, what works with your brain, than the way you like to make stuff creatively.
Out of my own personal curiosity, could you walk us through how you color grade and what you think about what the emotional terms, what the color sphere is, and what colors you choose, why, how often it switches, and so on?
So I mean, it helps to also be the one shooting it, but it's really about your main pass you're going to go through, and then just sort of like working with log footage, you kind of set those transforms up. A lot of people do like CSTs, and then everything turns into this sort of like node tree thing that I feel like they just get paid per node. I don't know why they do that, but you can do a lot of stuff where you basically will tell it on the way in what each color space is for each camera that you're shooting from, and then you can kind of go through and then do your basic contrast stuff. And then I'll go through, so I'll do all my basic shots. And then at some point I will set up a timeline level node, because you've got like clips, groups, and timeline. And so clips is per shot, groups you can basically assign that as you want to assign that, and then timeline is the whole thing. And mostly working in narrative, when I get into the timeline, I'll throw like a film emulation or something that matches a color stock look that I like, which I definitely set up beforehand. But then I'll go through and then find what I really think fits right for that, and maybe go back and redo some things. And then I go back and window everything, which I'm sure somebody's going to write a review on that, but I like to window in and kind of draw your eye to where you want it to go in the frame, because I find that it's very important. Even if something is like a normal thing, just by taking the background down in every shot by 5 or 10%, so your eye snaps to where you want to go, and just sort of watch it, like defocused and like half drunkenly, and just watch where your eye snaps to in each frame, and you'll find that does 100% more. And doing stuff like you can do things like sharpen the eyes in close-ups and things like that when you get into that later on, but it's about finding the consistency in that, and then going through and doing things like taking care of issues, like especially in digital stuff, you'll find that like if you do stuff outside and you don't have that much control of it, the trees become like atomic green, and so taking that and going through what is it? It's like basically it's just a line that'll go through all the colors, and you can it's an HSL picker, so I'll go through the greens and just bring down the saturation and that and stuff like that. And that's my other cheat for you guys, is if you're doing stuff in mixed lighting, we've got tungsten and daylight, shoot it for daylight and then go through and take that yellow channel, or if you're doing it the other way, and take the blue channel and just take the saturation out of that color, and you'll find that it'll do 90% of your stuff to sort of eliminate that like jaundice vibe, or like everything behind us goes super blue or whatever, and it's phenomenal for it. So keep it simple, and whenever you go through and you go through and do like LUTs and looks like that, turn it down, because I've definitely found on earlier projects that I'm like, I go and I hand it in, I'm like, I love this, and then they're like, why does it look like that? And you're like, oh, sorry, and then you just turn it down, and then it's doing the same thing you want it to do, but it's not so in your face, because it's not the whole bowl of candy, just have a piece of it,
Well, yeah, and definitely especially when you're learning, although I still do this now, the way that I learn is basically jack the slider all the way up to one end and see what distorted effects it has, then pull it back to see what it looks like when it's a little bit more normal. And I feel like it's easy with color correcting to get into that.
Oh yeah, no, it becomes like the 2009, 2010 era, where everything is just like, why is this whole movie teal? Like,
Would you like to walk us through your sound design?
Yeah, so for sound, this goes back to keeping a project organized. We have a thing called buses, where basically certain tracks will go to one track. It's like getting on a bus, they're all getting on together. So I split that up into production audio, which will mainly stay muted through, but I like to basically keep whatever the original production audio was intact in case I ever need to go back to it. Then I have my dialogue layer, which will be any words that are spoken between two characters. And then I have effects, any sound effects, and then music. And then I like to throw one in there that's sort of is a little bit between music and sound effects that I call stingers, or basically my non-diegetic sounds. So it's like the dun 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 on the big moment of your movie. Generally I'll lump that in with music though as well, but I like to keep that as a separate track, because I tend to go, when it's my project, I like to put a lot of those in. When I'm editing somebody else's project, I know that they might not necessarily appreciate that level of sound design to it. And so the big thing with all those different layers is it then lets you go through and listen to each of your sort of sections of the film. So if I want to pull out all the sound effects and just make sure my dialogue is sounding clear and sounds level, like it's all the same volume, and sounds consistent from shot to shot, I can just listen to the dialogue bus. Or if I want to see what my sound design is doing, I can just listen to my effects bus. There's actually a really good channel on Instagram that does this for famous movie scenes called In-Depth Sound Design, where they'll show you the different layers of sound specifically for sound effects. But you can really see how they'll show sort of the practical sound effects, and then they'll show sort of the non-diegetic sound effects that are more for emotion, that aren't reflective of what you would actually hear in the real world, but are there to basically convey a feeling that the scene is trying to convey. And it's really neat to see what the different layers of sound design are doing for just a single moment. And yeah, it is, I tend to, as in terms of like overall philosophy for sound design, I'm trying to convey a feeling with sound. Like good sound design is emotional, and so sometimes that means being very realistic, because it's not actually a particularly emotional scene, or it is about the words that characters are saying to each other, not about anything else. Sometimes if it's like a gunshot, that has a lot of emotion to it. Is it something that's a rapid thing that's happening because there's a bunch of gunshots going off? Is it one big gunshot that's a key moment? The other one I like to use as an example is the Wolverine blade effect coming out of his hands. you can really tell sort of how is Wolverine feeling today by how fast those claws come out and what other sounds, like do you hear more of the meat because it's more of a pained moment, or do you hear more of the shing from the blade? And you're learning a lot just from that single sound effect about what the emotional feeling of the scene is.
I have to say I love in-depth sound. That's one of my favorites. And then also doing non-diegetic sounds to do stuff. One of my favorite things that I snuck into mine is there's a scene where our rookie character gets kind of yeeted into some boxes, and I threw a bowling pin sound in there. And the director's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Trust me, it'll work." And it's the same thing as like they go through the whole thing when in Titanic when the Italian character gets smashed by the smokestack, and they put like a lion in there and some other stuff and things like that. And it's like really being able to play around with stuff that just gives you like a psychological feeling. It's cool.
Another classic one is Fast and the Furious. There's usually tiger growls and lion roars in the car engines.
That's crazy. So do you have like a bank of sound effects that you just pull from, and how do you find the music that you use?
So for sound effects, I bought a bunch of packs online. I've also got a pretty extensive library of stuff that I've recorded. I try to carry a sound recorder on me wherever I go. Again, keeping organized.
Do you have it here now? Do you have it here now?
I actually have been using my phone more frequently. So that's that. If I don't have the sound recorder on me, I'll just use my phone to do it, and it's surprising how good that can be if you get it close enough to a source. Definitely, it's important to, when you're doing something like that, keep notes on what you've recorded and when, so you don't have to do it 6 months later and go through a ton at once. Not that that's happened to me repeatedly.
I'm just going to say Storyblocks is definitely a great way for me to get music. I also, in my project, because it's a fan project, I just stole all the music from the original films, which really help at blending in different. It's everybody is stealing off the original Ghostbusters soundtrack, but then there's different moods to each of those. Because like Afterlife is taking that and then doing, because that's sort of a Spielberg film wrapped in Ghostbusters, and then Frozen Empire has more of like there's a little bit more horror sounds and the newer, so much more depth and newer music for it, but picking sounds from each of those soundtracks and then throwing them in. It actually makes it very hard to watch any of those original movies, because I'm like, wait a minute, I should be in the basement of the house right now, you know? And it just goes back to my own stuff, but definitely like Storyblocks or any of those canned things where they're online.
I was going to say, for me, I've done a lot of 48-hour film projects, and we use the YouTube audio library a lot for both music and a little bit of sound effects. There's also the Free Music Archive, which can be a good source of music, but that one you have to check the rights clearances, because not everything on there is available for commercial use, or you need to attribute it to the original artist.
I will say for us, I suck at picking out music. Like, I'm just awful at it, so thank God we don't put it in our videos. But I will say, specifically with like YouTube or Instagram or social media, a lot of audio can be branding. We have 3 specific songs that we'll choose, and we have at the beginning a ding that comes up with reactions, and you hear that and you associate it with it, because like you were saying, like with that shing with a Wolverine, like so much emotional, and people identify with the audio without even thinking about it. So audio can really, really, really set the tone, or like give you a brand. Specifically with podcasts, like some of them will typically use the same songs. Like they'll have like 5 to 10 and they'll use the same ones over again. But for my own personal interest, how do you pick out a song? I need advice.
If it's a 48-hour film project, panic. No, but I guess it goes back to, it's a really subjective thing, but what feels right. Like a lot of times that when I'm doing a narrative short and I'm dropping songs at the end, it just is a matter of watching the movie with this new track added and seeing, does this feel right, does it not? Sometimes a classic, if it's an instrumental song, I'll actually slow it down, and that might actually make it fit the scene more. But it's really about sort of watching through something, how you feel, and this is also where it really helps to have somebody new come in and take a listen to see, hey, does this work for you? This is kind of working for me. What do you think? And try a few options.
I can't explain my process, but I've had this obscene luck for the last 30 years, and I don't know what it is. I don't do a lot of editing, but whenever I've done anything back into like high school, I'll go through it and then desperately throw a track in, and then it will high points will hit at the right time, or I had one where I cut a special effects thing, and I still remember this, and there's a scene where the camera gets, it was like a fire truck from Independence Day hits the camera and blanks it out, and the drums cut right at that moment. I literally threw it in, rendered it out, and went to class and showed it, and never gave it to anybody before it. But it's just when it works out, I'm like, oh, thank God, the force is still there, or whatever it is, because musically I am not. It's terrible.
Actually, I think that's a good philosophy to have with post-production in general, is you're kind of always on the hunt for happy accidents.
Mm-hmm. That is very true. Yeah, I've spent hours cutting on the beat to make things work with the music, but you're lucky.
Yeah, no, just because once you have it in there and you throw it in, and if it's not working, move it forward or backward a little bit and see if that does it too. I mean, when you just do it and it just happens, you're just like, oh, thank God. I don't know.
Well, as editors, we can also cheat, because a classic thing that I'll do is cut, say the song crescendos at a different point, but I want it to happen at this key moment in the scene. You can just cut the song there and then sort of fade that crescendo in. Now, obviously, it's not going to work if you just do that anywhere, so you got to sort of feel it out, listen to it, make sure it sounds right before you do that. But that's one of the beautiful things about post, is that we do have the ability to change almost everything that we're playing with.
Mm-hmm. We get to play God.
I had a situation in one of them where I had a song and it started a little late, and the other song had kind of faded out after that, because that's what happens when you steal music from Hollywood movies. But I took the beginning of it and I cut it, and then moved it. I copied it and then just moved it forward, and so it kind of did a double start. And it's in a moment just to fill in the quiet, but not. I just did it in a right way that it wasn't obnoxious, but it was little cheats like that are a great way, I think, to kind of do that. So if it's going like that and you don't have another song and you don't want to insert another song to kind of fill that hole, just kind of DJ remix it a little bit if you can get away with it.
Oh yeah, I've definitely repeated sections of songs before. Questions? I feel like I try to add new things. I started editing when I think I was about 14 years old. And then from editing, I started to learn Photoshop. And then from Photoshop and Illustrator, it went to After Effects. And I've kind of stayed there for a long while, but now I'm trying to learn Cinema 4D, which is, it's insane. It's an insane program. But yeah, I like to add on. I'm very good at editing. I'm a pretty good animator. And I think learning new programs and new skills really helps me with the ones that I currently have. So I'm always trying to learn new things and do more things.
Yeah, I think with filmmaking in general, it's good to be a specialist in something. So for example, I really specialize in sound design professionally, but the more of a generalist you can be, one, you'll be a better team member to everybody else you're working with, because you understand what goes into their job, and hopefully you're not doing things that make their job harder. And also, it's just fun to be a generalist. It's fun to see how all the pieces fit together. And so definitely it helps to pick a specialty. And there are people who specialize in just cutting and just editing. And so if you're looking to get into this profession, I'd say look for that specialty. See what really makes you happy, what feels right when you're doing it, and really dive deep into that. But don't be afraid to play with everything else, because the more that you learn about those other fields, one, you'll be a better collaborator, and you'll be able to make more interesting things, and you'll also be a better team player with everybody else.
I walked backward in every one of these roles. So I became a colorist to ensure the quality of the stuff that I shot as a DP. And then on this latest project, I became an editor just because it's a free project and I didn't want to subject somebody else to it. And we knew so much about what we wanted to create in the beginning that we wanted to ensure that. And then sound was the same thing, and the effects. I would say, find the things that you love. A lot of this stuff comes from my love of movies and playing in those things. When I was a kid, there was a great book on special effects that shouldn't have been in a elementary school library. because it had all the greats like RoboCop and all this other stuff in there, and to go back and to kind of play in each of those things. So find things that you really enjoy and do that, and then kind of expand out a little bit more if you want to. As somebody who is visual and not very musical or into audio, to kind of delve into that and learn it, and you know, there's YouTube is a phenomenal educator for just about everything. So, you know, listen to what everybody is doing in terms of the pitfalls and the greats, like you're saying, in-depth sound, and do that. And then there are colorists online that will teach you the back and forth and what they did in that. And also coming back from my time in front of or behind the camera, like watching videos from like the American Society of Cinematographers. Just watch people that are making the things that you want, that you loved going to the movie to go see, and go back and do the sort of DVD commentary or YouTube equivalent of that, and see how they did each of those little parts, and taking something and breaking apart something that you love. It's like being a kid again. You know, you have that toy and you're like, how does this work? And then you get your dad's screwdriver and it never works like that again. The same thing goes with that. Like, definitely go under the hood of everything that you, because it's all a magic trick. So to turn around and do that. So yeah.
I think we have 5 minutes left. 14?
14, great.
Oh, okay. Sweet. That completely changed my brain.
So is that closing thoughts or?
Yeah, no, that's good. Does anybody else have any other
Oh,
questions?
yeah, any
then?
questions?
So I have a question.
Shoot.
So when you guys are working in post, is there a threshold that you guys have to cross generally where you decide that you need reshoots in place, or is it like, is the goal always to avoid reshoots at a low cost and stuff? Like, how does that usually happen?
That's a really good question. It depends project to project. Some projects, like, you will not have an opportunity to reshoot. What you have on your hard drive when you're editing is what you get.
Find the lie.
Hmm?
Find the lie. Like, it's so many things that, you know, you could go in and do a reshoot, or like you said with the control panel, because I had something similar with our thing, and it was an ADR line that it was something that we had cut out earlier while we were filming, and we did an ADR line to kind of cover up and set up this thing that we needed, because there was no motivation for it in the story, even though it was established in the script. But because of the way things changed on set, we didn't get it on that day. We shortened one scene to kind of enhance another one in this, yeah, ADR lines, or, you know, the sound of like the creak of a door opening. I had a shot that I was very married to that did this big camera movement, and then we cut it down for time, and I just stole the sound of the door opening. And as the camera pans to the door, because it panned around and then back to the guy, we just took the sound of the door opening, and then it pans to him and he's in there. And you're like, nobody thinks like, oh, there's 2 minutes of footage missing out of this. Thank you for getting rid of it. But just putting a sound in there to cover over, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a good point. There's almost always a way to solve the problem in post. Let me caveat that. Almost always a way to solve a structural problem like that in post with some creativity, and so that should always be sort of your first attempt, should be to do it that way. Then there are things like adding sound design or adding a visual effect to maybe sell a story beat that didn't come across from the actual production, and then only if you've exhausted those options should you end up doing reshoots. But if it's something easy, like a classic one is going and reshooting an insert, which is a close-up of an object. So I did this on a short where it wasn't clear where a character had been, and so I a year later went in and shot a post-it note on the fridge that had that information. Because it was living in the same house, it's the same fridge, it fits seamlessly into the movie, even though that shot is a year separate from all of the other shots in the short.
No, I'm different, especially because I work in the YouTube sphere, so it's a little bit easier to reshoot. And so actually it came up a situation this week where I'm just like, hey, we need to reshoot all of this. We have a new guy working on our channel. He doesn't really have a film background, but he's a chemist, and he got a lot of popularity on TikTok, and just kind of blends into our channel. But he did this mixture where it turns pink, and then he shakes it, and then it separates out. But his hand was in the way of that visual. So I'm like, hey, we gotta redo this. And also I'm like, is there a way that you could do this without shaking it? Because you put your hand on it and you shake it, and you want that visual to just be there and to watch it happening. So he did it in a flask with like a stir spinny thing, and it looks so much better. And especially because it is YouTube, you need that visual. If you break that good visual, people are going to swipe away. We need people to not swipe away. And also, this short was structured so that shot was at the very end. And I'm like, nope, that's the money shot. This needs to be in the beginning. We need to see this in the first 5 seconds. So we rewrote the entire script, and then he's reshooting all of it. And for us, those visuals are important. It is important that in the first 5 seconds, something is happening that is visually engaging. And we will rework our shorts a lot after we've done the first version. I mentioned the ethanol one. Like we see like, oh shoot, here's where it should be, and we're starting to get better at that. But we're just kind of learning what makes a really successful short for us right now. So it's always a work in progress. But yeah, we are not afraid to reshoot. Our longs are kind of different. We do all the B-roll and then we shoot the A-roll. So it's kind of like we don't necessarily need those reshoots because we already have that. And then we plan the A-roll around that B-roll that we have.
I've noticed a trend online lately where you'll think you're starting at the beginning of a video, but it's actually the end of it. And then somehow they get the end of it and it kind of tapers off and then bleeds the beginning. And then it does this like the loop in there. Have you found any success doing that kind of stuff too, where you're just sort of putting the end at the beginning and the beginning is the end?
Well, it's kind of like flipping around that script. Like instead of saying, oh, building up to this really cool visual, you start with that visual and then you break down how it happens. But we have looped before and people are like, wow, that's really seamless. I'm like, yes, it's literally the shot cut in half and then put at the beginning. But I do like starting with like, here's the really cool tidbit, here's the really cool fact, and now we're gonna break down how we got there. And people have been really liking that. And also for us, we found like things that they wouldn't really normally see or think about. Our most successful short has about 12 million views, and it is literally called Don't Swallow Watch Batteries. And the opening shot, George sticks a watch battery in a hot dog, and it essentially like corrodes the hot dog. And then he gets out a car battery, a piece of ham, water, and he hooks up like electrodes to it. And then he's like, now this is what happens to a throat if you swallow a watch battery. And it's not something you'd ever think about doing or have ever seen before. And that's our most successful short because it's kind of this bridge of human living and something you never really think about, something you never see. And you're like, wow, that's crazy.
As somebody with a toddler, I actually think about that quite a lot.
Exactly. Oh shoot, what's that? Michael Cera, Something Against the World. Yes. That one is just so cool how it's done. Like that one is it's just when you get everything working together, it's just like you get that. And that for me is just like so inspirational. And it's just kind of like, oh my God, like I have control over doing stuff and I can do stuff like this. And it's just very, very cool how that all works together. And it's just incredible. I love that. And I watch a lot of YouTube because of my work, and it's just random stuff that people will do. I can't come to any right now, but I will pick a random YouTube channel and watch like 1 or 2 of their videos per week just to kind of get a pulse of what's going on. And I do love like when people will be talking, they just cut it off in this abrupt thing, or they do thing, well, people start in the middle of a sentence, and it's just fun to see what people are doing, and just trying new things and seeing if it works.
So I've one actually from this year, which was 28 years later, of just a fantastic use of elements. I'm not sure what you'd call them because they're not stock footage, but I guess archival footage and sound effects and things from speeches mixed into this very gritty zombie movie, and then the way that they do sort of PTSD and panic in that film is just, I think, incredible emotional editing.
I would say like things that, because I haven't really ever really focused on the editing specifically, but I would say that there are interesting things like Michael Mann. There was a really, like the period in terms of like Heat and Collateral and Miami Vice and his sort of like DV era, or film to DV era, but like dealing in like, he would do stuff like never have anything but just straight cuts in a film, and doing things like how do you do passage of time going through, and it's like you go from a quiet to loud, things like that were really interesting tidbits. And then I'll go in terms of like just overall, I would say the absolute classic is probably Terminator 2, just because it was one of the first things that I saw that broke down their DVDs broke down that process from like storyboards to marketing back in the day, but like going through and just sort of seeing how you build this sort of super gigantic action blockbuster and all the basics that will go into that. And honestly, you know, it's really cool that it's always the same 5 tricks, just used in different ways over and over and over and over again. So
I listened to this podcast. It's about like a Bravo reality one recap, and there's this one. They mock this one guy, and he's complaining about something. They always have this classical music behind it. And so I took that into our YouTube videos. George will go on a rant, and it'll have this classical music behind it, and I will slowly fade into a sepia tone, and then zoom in on him, and then just cut at the end of it, and I'll put like the smallest like record scratch that you can barely hear, but it works so well. So I think we're about 5 minutes left. Any questions?
we got time for one more.
So you're mentioning cutting for YouTube. I'm wondering if you find yourself ever that you're in contradiction with cutting for the YouTube algorithm versus cutting for like pacing or what you want to do with the cut. So I'm curious to hear you talk about that.
Oh, that algorithm is a beast. You can't like, what we do is we figure out, we're aware of what's going on around us, and so we kind of make it our own, and we see what works for us. We have, after every single meeting, every single video we have an analytics meeting about it, where we have this entire breakdown of when people leave. And we will, these offshoots, these off-roads. So if there's a transitional phase, people will leave. If there's like something that doesn't need to be there, people will leave. If we end a section where we don't have a new question, people will leave. So we pay very, very close attention to what people are doing and look at what's happening and make our best guesses about why they're leaving there. And then we don't tailor our videos to that, but we keep that very, very aware. We get rid of transitions, and now after every single segment, we have to make sure there's a new question that propels people to keep watching. We're very on top of it. We're very, so many analytics that we look at.
I know for me, doing shorts, I used to make much longer shorts, like 5 to 10 minutes, and then looking at how long people are actually watching things on YouTube, it was more like 2 minutes. And so I switched over to making 2-minute shorts, and I actually think that was really good practice. I would encourage, if you've got like an idea, a 2-minute proof of concept is a great prep for a 10-minute short film.
I'm going to leave that on both of you guys, because most of my stuff is narrative, so I just do that.
I liked it when the shorts were 1 minute, because it gave us this, like, you can't go over a minute. So that really, really, really forced us to be like, we need to keep this as succinct as possible. And then it was a breather when they moved it up to 3. One of my last thoughts that I have is, anytime I'm editing, I always like to watch it on a different platform. Like, I will cast it to my TV and watch it on my TV, and from there I'll be like, oh shoot, this is what I should have done, this is what I could do. I think it really helps to remove yourself from the program and watch it like you would as if you're an audience member.
The other thing I would say to that is, when editing my project, I would go through, and then at times I would put it on my phone and then put my phone in my pocket and listen through it. And then you can picture it in your head. You've been looking at it forever, but then it really gives you an idea of what's wrong with the sound, or if something goes wonky, and you can really feel it that way too.
And similarly, I try to watch things on my TV, on my phone, and my laptop screen. Because the other thing is you'll see things like, if the black level is not consistent, you might sort of notice outlines of effects and things that you wouldn't have noticed on your computer screen.
And that's time. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank
We
you,
appreciate
guys.
it.
Thank you very much.